All right, I'm going to start out this segment by making an admission. I am a hypocrite. I am a complete and total hypocrite. You guys have read the title of the segment, or if you're listening to the podcast, maybe not, but I'm sure you know what we're talking about right now. We're talking about live action remakes. And in particular, we're talking about live action remakes because of a piece of news that came out this past week, which is that Michael Gracie, who directed The Greatest Showman, I think most recently, and by the way, The Greatest Showman, one of my favorite movie musicals I've seen in a long time. I know it's not the most profound, and I know the story is pretty cliche. I don't really care. I love the music. Same guys who did the music for La La Land, I believe. Just amazing. I thought the music is amazing. I still listen to it sometimes. It's really a fantastic film, just because of the music alone, honestly. And then the story is fine. Hugh Jackman's great, and everyone else is great. So, anyways, Michael Gracie is directing a live-action remake of the movie Tangled. Now, I have some thoughts on this. But I want to first address what I opened up this segment with, the cold open, if you will. I'm a hypocrite because we'll save our thoughts on just actually remaking Tangled itself at the end of this segment. But I just want to talk about the general concept these days of making these live action remakes, because obviously it's mostly Disney, but you have other studios starting to do it as well. For example, obviously the big one coming out next year, and one I am very excited for, is How to Train Your Dragon. Now, that is really the reason why I say I'm a hypocrite, because here's the thing. The live-action remakes before, right, when Disney was digging deep into their catalog, and when they were first starting to do this with Cinderella, and then you had Beauty and the Beast, and Maleficent, kind of. Maleficent was a little bit different, but, Aladdin and Lion King. But these are films, right? Mulan, which, I didn't like that movie at all. It's one of the first reviews I actually have on this channel, if you want to check it out, maybe like 4 years ago during the pandemic. But anyways, these live-action remakes, right? Disney was digging deep into their classics, right? And they were trying to figure out, okay, so what's something we can do to garner nostalgia? And to be fair, there's two sides that I see to these Disney live action remakes, right? And these are movies that were made in the 90s, but some even, like Snow White is coming out this year, or next year, I should say. And that's a movie that came out in the 40s, 50s. It's been a long, long time. Obviously, Snow White has been in the Disney zeitgeist for a long time, though. So that's, it's not like Snow White disappeared for 100 years and then came back. So anyways, like I said, two sides to this argument. The cynical side is, every movie studio wants to make as much money as they possibly can. I mean, sure, you should find creatives who love the properties as much as, anyone else does, and the most talented ones as well. And so the Marvel movies, for just as an example, I'm sure the Russos and McFeely and Marcus, they love the characters, they love the property, and we end up with Avengers Endgame. On the other hand, Disney is also looking at that and going, but we also almost made $3 billion on Avengers Endgame, and obviously not in profits, but they made billions with a B in profit on Avengers Endgame. So it's huge for them, right? And so yes, these live action remakes are a way to garner nostalgia very easily. And you'd hope that the people who are making them have love and care and passion for these projects, but it's not always the case. But if it is, then you'd hope you end up with good products. And I have to say, there are some good ones, in my opinion, in those live action remakes. I really, really enjoyed the Jungle Book movie in 2016. Thought it was great, honestly. It gave me a lot of hope for The Lion King, which, in 2019, which I didn't hate it. I just thought it was kind of lifeless, no pun intended, because it's a lot of animals. But I just thought the way that they did the CGI animals in The Lion King without having a human to interact with them just didn't work as well as in the Jungle Book. But I also loved 2019's Aladdin. And here's the thing. I've said this before on the YouTube channel. I believe I made a segment about this a long time ago, about what the point of these remakes are. And I'm going to not reiterate, but sort of retread that ground here, is that, look, I mean, I'm somebody who didn't grow up watching these movies. I've seen most of them, I'm sure, in bits and pieces at the very least. And I'm familiar, everyone's familiar with who grew up in the United States at the very least. I'm sure most people are familiar with Cinderella and Snow White and Beauty and the Beast, etc., right? Disney has made them such a big part of the pop culture zeitgeist that, it's hard not to know them. But I didn't have that inherent nostalgia for these films. But then it's a way to kind of reintroduce me as somebody who wasn't familiar with these movies in the same way, emotionally, that's in the same way that some other people are. And also a new generation of kids who might be like, oh, those movies are old. And say what you will. I mean, but for an 8-year-old kid, a movie that came out 20 years ago in the 90s is old. It's pretty old. Almost 30 years now, actually. So, I mean, to be fair, there's a reason. Like, that's sort of the non-cynical reason that, on the flip side of course you want to make as much money as you can. Then, yeah, the flip side of that is, I think there is some merit to saying, well, we want to reintroduce these characters to a new audience. Again, I'm not saying one or the other is right and one or the other is wrong. It just is what it is, I believe. But here's the thing, right? You have those movies that came out 30 years ago, in some cases, like Beauty and the Beast, but they were animated and whatnot. And then, you even have some remakes like Snow White that are of movies that came out almost 100 years ago, right? And so I think that at the very least for me, that there is some merit to saying, well, these are classics, right? These are classic films that you're remaking. Totally fine. Now, we've entered a new phase here where we're not just remaking quote-unquote classics anymore. And one could argue that some of these films that you're making these days are modern classics, right? Moana, How to Train Your Dragon, and Tangled now. I just happen to think it's a little bit too soon for this, don't you think? And the fact that, I mean, Moana, the first Moana came out about 5-6 years ago, and the second one came out a couple weeks ago. And you're also, at the same time you were making the Moana 2, the sequel to Moana, you were also making the live action Moana. That feels a little bit over the top, don't you think? How to Train Your Dragon is, I would say it's going to be a modern animated classic. In my modern, I mean 21st century, I guess. But, I mean, it came out less than 15 years ago, I think, or maybe just about 15 years ago. And I don't think that, and it's not just the fact that the first film came out 15 years ago. The third film came out about 5 years ago, right? Same with Moana. I said, the second film just came out a couple weeks ago. And Tangled, I think, came out about 10 years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And fine, whatever. You want to remake those films? Fine, whatever. But to me, it's almost like, okay, well, we're pushing it now, aren't we? Like, there's the flip side of we want to reintroduce the audience to these characters. But then, the cynical side says you just introduced them to the audience within this generation, and now you're remaking them. It seems like this is a little bit more of a blatant cash grab towards the other side, the cynical side that goes, well, why are we doing this? Well, money, obviously. However, I started out this segment by saying I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite because I watched the How to Train Your Dragon trailer and I felt all the feels. I felt all the feels because I was a kid growing up watching the animated film. It has a very special place in my heart, and it's less about me having the nostalgia of, oh, I watched Beauty and the Beast so many times when I was a kid and my mom would put it on, in the DVD or the VHS or whatever, and then now they're remaking it, that's awesome. Less of that and more, I have the nostalgia of, I remember going to see this in the theaters with my friends, kind of like the original Star Wars, the Star Wars sequel films are like for me. I remember when they first came out, the episode 7, it was a moment, right? It was a cultural moment. So anyways, I'm a hypocrite because while I'm the person saying we should be, I'm ambivalent, I would say, to the idea of just remaking these films, but also I would love for them to make original films because guess what? Frozen and Frozen 2 and presumably Frozen 3 are some of the highest grossing films ever. Inside Out 1, Inside Out 2, highest grossing, Inside Out 2 especially, highest grossing animated film ever. Ever. So I think that it's, as long as these films don't come out at the expense of making original films, because I think Disney should realize that, yeah, sure, you can make $1 billion on Aladdin, but you could make almost $2 billion with Inside Out 2. And that came from original properties. And I hope that Disney doesn't take the wrong lessons out from this. Because, yeah, I'm a hypocrite. I'm going to be one of the first people to see this live-action How to Train Your Dragon film because it just gave me the feels. But I'm just hoping that, the wrong lessons don't get learned from this because at a certain point, for example, what's a recently animated? The Wild Robot. Like, The Wild Robot comes out this year, and then in 2026, we're getting the live-action remake. I hope that doesn't happen, I would be really disappointed if it does. But anyways, I want to wrap up this segment. I use this segment really to talk about live-action remakes in general. Let's talk about Tangled, though, for a couple minutes. Tangled, yeah, it's great. I mean, it was a fantastic film when I saw it for the first time as a young kid, and I think that it has all the potential to be very fun visually. Obviously, the Rapunzel angle to it as well. The singing is great. What's the I See the Light? Is that the song? Great song, great music, great acting. I think it'd be fun. I think it'd be fun to see it in live action. Again, too soon? I don't know. You'll have to let me know in the comments down below. Guys, what do you think about this live action Tangled remake and about just these remakes that are becoming closer and closer to the originals, in terms of years? What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments down below.